Hey everybody, I'm Kate. I am an assistant manager at Porter Square Books, and I was on a family vacation in Salt Lake City when all of this started going down. So I am stuck in my childhood home in Salt Lake, and I thought that since I'm here where my parents used to read me books, I would read you a quick little bedtime story. Just a section from one of my favorite books. And when I was a kid, my favorite thing about my parents reading me stories is that my mom would do the voices. So I will attempt to do some of the voices for you. And I hope you enjoy. I miss you, Cambridge. I hope to see you all soon. So, this is MORT by Terry Pratchett. This is the bright, candlelit room where the life timers are stored. Shelf upon shelf of them, squat hourglasses, one for each living person, pouring their fine sand from the future into the past. The accumulated hiss of the falling grains makes the room roar like the sea. This is the owner of the room, stalking through it with a preoccupied air. His name is Death. But not any death. This is the Death whose particular sphere of operations is, well, not a sphere at all, but the disc world, which is flat and rides on the back of 4 giant elephants who stand on the shell of the enormous star turtle Great Twin, and which is bounded by a waterfall that cascades endlessly into space. Scientists have calculated that the chance of anything so patently absurd actually existing are millions to one. But magicians have calculated that million to one chances crop up 9 times out of 10. Death clicks across the black and white tiled floor on toes of bone, muttering inside his cowl as his skeletal fingers count along the rows of busy hourglasses. Finally, he finds one that seems to satisfy him, lifts it carefully from its shelf, and carries it across to the nearest candle. He holds it so that the light glints off it, and stares at the little point of reflected brilliance. The steady gaze from those twinkling eye sockets encompasses the world turtle, scuttling through the depths of space, carapace scarred by comets and pitted by meteors. One day, even Great Twin will die, Death knows. Now that would be a challenge. But the focus of his gaze dives onward toward the blue-green magnificence of the disk itself, turning slowly under its tiny orbiting sun. Now it curves away toward the great mountain range called the Ramtops. The Ramtops are full of deep valleys and unexpected crags and considerably more geography than they know what to do with. They have their own peculiar weather, full of shrapnel rain and whiplash winds and permanent thunderstorms. Some people say it's all because the Ramtops are the home of old wild magic. Mind you, some people will say anything. Death blinks, adjusts for depth of vision. Now he sees the grassy country on the turnwise slopes of the mountain. Now he sees a particular hillside. Now he sees a field. Now he sees a boy running. Now he watches. Now, in a voice like lead slabs being dropped on granite, he says, "Yes." It's my lead slab voice. Death. You gotta imagine. There was no doubt that there was something magical in the soil of that hilly, broken area, which, because of the strange tint that it gave to the local flora, was known as the octarine grass country. For example, it was one of the few places on the disc where plants produced reannual varietals. Reannuals are plants that grow backwards in time. You sow the seed this year, and they grow last year. Mort's family specialized in distilling the wine from reannual grapes. These were very powerful and much sought after by fortune tellers, since of course they enabled them to see the future. The snag was that you got the hangover the morning before and had to drink a lot to get over it. Reannual growers tended to be big, serious men, much given to introspection and close examination of the calendar, A farmer who neglects to sow ordinary seeds only loses the crop, whereas anyone who forgets to sow seeds of a crop that has already been harvested 12 months before risks disturbing the entire fabric of causality, not to mention acute embarrassment. It was also acutely embarrassing to Mort's family that the youngest son was not at all serious and had about the same talent for horticulture that you would find in a dead starfish. It wasn't that he was unhelpful, but he had that kind of vague, cheerful helpfulness that serious men soon learn to dread. There was something infectious, possibly even fatal, about it. He was tall, red-haired, and freckled, with a sort of body that seems to be only marginally under its owner's control. It appeared to have been built out of knees. On this particular day, it was hurtling across the high fields, waving its hands and yelling. Mort's father and uncle watched it disconsolately from the stone wall. "What I don't understand," said Father Lezick, "is that the birds don't even fly away. I'd fly away if I saw it coming towards me." "Ah, the human body's a wonderful thing. I mean, his legs go all over the place, but there's a fair turn of speed there." Mort reached the end of a furrow. An overfull wood pigeon lurched slowly out of his way. "His heart's in the right place, mind," said Lezick carefully. "Ah, course, 'tis the rest of him that isn't." "He's clean about the house, doesn't eat much," said Lezick. "No, I can see that." Lezick looked sideways at his brother, who was staring fixedly at the sky. "I did hear you got a place going up at your farm, Hamish," he said. "Ah, got an apprentice, didn't I?" "Ah," said Lezick gloomily. "When was that, then?" "Yesterday," said his brother, lying with rattlesnake speed. "All signed and sealed. Sorry. Look, I got nothing against young Mort, see. He's as nice a young boy as you could wish to meet. It's just that—" I know, said Lezick. "He couldn't find his arse with both hands." They stared at the distant figure. It had fallen over. Some pigeons waddled over to inspect it. "There's a brain there, all right," Lezick conceded. "Sometimes he starts thinking so hard you has to hit him around the head to get his attention. His granny taught him to read, see. Oh, you reckon it gets overheated." Mort had got up and tripped over his robe. "You ought to set him to a trade," said Hamish reflectively. "The priesthood, maybe. Or wizardry. They do a lot of reading, wizards." They looked at each other. Into both their minds stole an inkling of what Mort might be capable of if he got his well-meaning hands on a book of magic. "All right," said Hamish hurriedly. "Something else, then. There must be lots of things he could turn his hand to." "He starts thinking too much, that's the trouble," said Lezick. "Look at him now. You don't think about how to scare birds, he just does it. A normal boy, I mean." Hamish scratched his chin thoughtfully. "It could be someone else's problem," he said. Lezick's expression did not alter, but there was a subtle change around his eyes. "How do you mean?" he said. "There's the hiring fair at Sheepridge next week. You set him up as apprentice, see, and his new master'll have the job of knocking him into shape. 'Tis the law. Get him indentured, and 'tis binding." Lezick looked across the field at his son, who was examining a rock. "I wouldn't want anything to happen to him, mind," he said doubtfully. "We're quite fond of him, his mother and me. You get used to people." "It'd be for his own good, you'll see. Make a man of him." "Ah, well, there's plenty of raw material," sighed Lezick. Mort was getting interested in the rock. It had curly shells in it, relics of the early days of the world when the Creator had made creatures out of stone. No one knew why. Mort was interested in lots of things. Why people's teeth fitted so neatly together, for example. He'd given that one a lot of thought. Then there was the puzzle of why the sun came out during the day instead of at night, when the light would be more useful. He knew the standard explanation, which somehow didn't seem satisfying. In short, Mort was one of those people who are more dangerous than a bag full of rattlesnakes. He was determined to discover the underlying logic behind the universe, which was going to be hard because there wasn't one. The creator had a lot of remarkably good ideas when he put the world together, but making it understandable hadn't been one of them. Tragic heroes always moan when the gods take an interest in them, but it's the people the gods ignore who get the really tough deals. His father was yelling at him as usual. Mort threw the rock at a pigeon, which was almost too full to lurch out of the way, and wandered back across the field. And that was why Mort and his father walked down through the mountains into Sheep Ridge on Hogswatch Eve, with Mort's rather sparse possessions in a sack on the back of a donkey. The town wasn't much more than 4 sides to a cobbled square, lined with shops that provided all the service industry of the farming community. After 5 minutes, Mort came out of the tailor's, wearing a loose-fitting brown garment of imprecise function, which had been understandably unclaimed by a previous owner and had plenty of room for him to grow, on the assumption that he would grow into a 19-legged elephant. His father regarded him critically. "Very nice," he said. "For the money?" "It itches," said Mort. "I think there's things in here with me. There's thousands of lads in the world to be very thankful for a nice warm..." Lezic paused and gave up. "Garment like that, my lad." "I could share it with them," Mort said hopefully. Oh, this is Lord of the Rings accent logic, where people can grow up in the same household and have totally different accents. It's Discworld. "You've got to look smart," said Lezic severely. "You've got to make an impression, stand out in the crowd." There was no doubt about it. He would. They set out among the throng crowding the square, each listening to his own thoughts. Usually Mort enjoyed visiting the town with its cosmopolitan atmosphere and strange dialects from villages as far away as 5, even 10 miles. But this time he felt unpleasantly apprehensive, as if he could remember something that hadn't happened yet. The fair seemed to work like this. Men looking for work stood in ragged lines in the center of the square. Many of them sported little symbols in their hats to tell the world what kind of work they were trained in. Shepherds wore a wisp of wool, carters a hank of horsehair, interior decorators a strip of rather interesting Hessian wall covering, and so on. The boys seeking apprenticeships were clustered on the hub side of the square. "You just go and stand there, and someone comes round and offers you an apprenticeship," said Lezic, his voice trimmed with uncertainty. "If they like the look of you, that is." "How do they do that?" said Mort. "Well," said Lezic, and paused. Hamish hadn't explained about this bit. He drew on his limited knowledge of the marketplace, which was restricted to livestock sales, and ventured, "I suppose they count your teeth and that, and make sure you don't wheeze, and your feet are all right. I shouldn't let on about reading. It unsettles people." "And then what?" said Mort. "Then you go and learn a trade," said Lezic. "What trade in particular?" "Well, carpentry is a good one," Lezic hazarded. "Or thievery. Someone's got to do it." Mort looked at his feet. He was a dutiful son, when he remembered, and if being an apprentice was what was expected of him, then he was determined to be a good one. Carpentry didn't sound very promising, though. Wood had a stubborn life of its own, and a tendency to split, and official thieves were rare in the Ramtops, where people weren't rich enough to afford them. "All right," he said eventually. "I'll go and give it a try, but what happens if I don't get prenticed?" Lezic scratched his head. "I don't know," he said. "I expect you just wait around until the end of the fair. At midnight, I suppose." And now midnight approached. A light frost began to crisp the cobblestones. In the ornamental clock tower that overlooked the square, a couple of delicately carved little automatons whizzed out of trap doors in the clock face and struck the quarter hour. 15 minutes to midnight. Mort shivered, but the crimson fires of shame and stubbornness flared up inside him, hotter than the slopes of hell. He blew on his fingers for something to do, and then stared up at the freezing sky, trying to avoid the stares of the few stragglers among what remained of the fair. Most of the stall keepers had packed up and gone. Even the hot meat pie man had stopped crying his wares and, with no regard for personal safety, was eating one. The last of Mort's fellow hopefuls had vanished hours ago. He was a wall-eyed young man with a stoop and a running nose, and Sheepridge's one licensed beggar had pronounced him to be ideal material. The lad on the other side of Mort had gone off to be a toy maker. One by one they had trooped off, the masons, the farriers, the assassins, the mercers, coopers, hoodwinkers, and ploughmen. In a few minutes it would be the new year, and 100 boys would be starting out hopefully on their careers, new worthwhile lives of useful service rolling out in front of them. Mort wondered miserably why he hadn't been picked. He'd tried to look respectable and had looked all prospective masters squarely in the eye to impress them with his excellent nature and extremely likable qualities. This didn't seem to have the right effect. "Would you like a hot meat pie?" said his father. "No." "You selling 'em cheap?" "No, thank you." Lezik hesitated. "Well, you could ask the man if he wants an apprentice," he said, helpfully. "Very reliable, the catering trade." "I don't think he does," said Mort. "No, probably not," said Lezik. "Bit of a one-man business, I expect. He's gone now, anyway. Tell you what, I'll save you a bit of mine." "I don't actually feel very hungry, Dad." "There's hardly any gristle." "No, but thanks all the same." "Oh." Lezik deflated a little. He danced about a bit to stamp some life back into his feet and whistled a few tuneless bars between his teeth. He felt he ought to say something, to offer some kind of advice, to point out that life had its ups and downs, to put his arm around his son's shoulder and talk expansively about the problems of growing up, to indicate, in short, that the world is a funny old place where one should never, metaphorically speaking, be so proud as to turn down the offer of a perfectly good meat pie. They were alone now. The frost, the last one of the year, tightened its grip on the stones. High in the tower above them, a cogged wheel went clonk, tripped a lever, released a ratchet, and let a heavy lead weight drop down. There was a dreadful metallic wheezing noise, and the trapdoors in the clock face slid open, releasing the clockwork men. Swinging their hammers jerkily, as if they were afflicted with robotic arthritis, they began to ring in the new day. "Well, that's it," said Lezik hopefully. They'd have to find somewhere to sleep. Hogswatch night was no time to be walking in the mountains. Maybe there was a stable somewhere. "It's not midnight until the last stroke," said Mort distantly. Lezik shrugged. The sheer strength of Mort's obstinacy was defeating him. "All right," he said. "We'll wait then." And then they heard the clip-clop of hooves, which boomed rather more loudly around the chilly square than comic acoustics should really allow. In fact, clip-clop was an astonishingly inaccurate word for the kind of noise which rattled around Mort's head. Clip-clop suggested a rather jolly little pony, quite possibly wearing a straw hat with holes cut out for its ears. An edge to this sound made it very clear that straw hats weren't an option. The horse entered the square by the hub road, steam curling off its huge, damp, white flanks and sparks striking up from the cobbles beneath it. It trotted proudly, like a war charger. It was definitely not wearing a straw hat. The tall figure on its back was wrapped up against the cold. When the horse reached the center of the square, the rider dismounted slowly and fumbled with something behind the saddle. Eventually he, or she, produced a nosebag, fastened it over the horse's ears, and gave it a friendly pat on the neck. The air took on a thick, greasy feel, and the deep shadows around Mort became edged with blue and purple rainbows. The rider strode towards him, black cloak billowing and feet making little clicking sounds on the cobbles. They were the only noises. Silence clamped down on the square like great drifts of cotton wool. The impressive effect was rather spoilt by a patch of ice.
"Oh, bugger."
All right, that's the first 10 pages of Terry Pratchett's Mort. It was great to see you guys. I miss you all. I miss Cambridge. I hope to be back soon. And Porter Square Books is open for phone calls and for online orders. So call in 11 to 6 on weekdays, or 9 to 6 on weekdays, and 11 to 5 on weekends. And everyone have a great night. Stay safe, stay healthy.